Hi. Hello, everyone. Thank you. I hope you were as dazzled as I was by the energy of our morning breakout sessions. I wish I could have attended all of them, but it didn't happen. So it's great to have so many inspiring Wildcat women in our midst. I'm Carol Connor Willingham, and honored to be an alumna of the class of 1977, which, as y'all know, was Davidson's very first class of freshman women way back before we would have been more appropriately called first years. It's been my pleasure to serve as co-chair for this milestone event, along with Michelle Sweeting and Lily Acton, with invaluable contributions from both an advisory committee of alumni volunteers and incredible conceptual and logistical direction, and most importantly, implementation from the internal staff, faculty, and student internal planning committee. I'd like to give special thanks to Danielle Strickland, Jennifer Wright, and Deidre Smith, Davidson staff members who led this effort with matchless enthusiasm, creativity, professionalism, a lot of patience, and just a few minutes ago, some tap dancing when something went awry at the last minute. Danielle, unfortunately, could not be with us today, but we are truly grateful for her support of this event, and I think she's joining us virtually. So now I would ask Deidre, Jennifer, and anyone else present who served on either of the two committees or in any other capacity to please stand and let us all express our appreciation to you. Deidre and Jennifer, would y'all stand up and wave just so you get a little extra special? Thank you. As some of you know, since 2005, every woman who was ever a part of our class has been encouraged to come to Ocean Isle Beach for a weekend of relaxing and reconnecting, including a surprisingly lively and engaging Zoom gathering one year necessitated by pandemic precautions. This year, actually, this very weekend would have been our 19th consecutive beach trip. But we really are thrilled to be on campus instead of at the coast. And there are, I think, 40 of us who are here to celebrate with all of you. And we're so pleased that many of you have similar gatherings with hallmates, teammates, classmates, families. Way to go. Quite remarkably, over 80% of the women from our class have attended at least one of our beach weekends. A few have perfect attendance. Several of us have only missed one or two. And even after all these years, almost every fall, we have a classmate or two joining us as first timers, and we are not giving up on the others. Anyway, a talented friend of ours from the class of 1976, a guy, caught wind of our beach gatherings a number of years ago. And in addition to taking us out on his boat for sunset cruises on the Intracoastal Waterway, he wrote and recorded a song in our honor. We play it every year at the beach, remembering the highs and the lows of our student days. Listening to this special song in the company of so many dear friends never fails to evoke strong emotions. And kudos to the college staff who played it last night as our kickoff session concluded. So John Stanfield entitled his song Pioneers. And one of the lines I especially love refers to a pioneer as someone who helps to build bridges. Seeing 5+ decades of Davidson alumni and friends assembled here, along with current students, staff, professors, and family and community members is a powerful affirmation of the legacy of all of the women who have made their mark on Davidson. From the now almost 100-year-old chambermaids atop Chambers building, to the women who studied at Davidson but were not eligible to earn a degree, to the women who cooked and served our meals, and yes, for some of us, did our laundry, to the brave and confident exchange and transfer students, to the hardworking support staff, professors, coaches, and women in the community who were and are our mentors, our inspiration, and our friends. We salute and thank all of you. And yes, I know that this weekend is all about women, but how could we not acknowledge the men who came before us and those who experienced this beloved place with us? With the deepest gratitude to those like President Sam Spencer, who championed the enrollment and full participation of women students, even in the face of some formidable skepticism, if not full-on opposition. Dr. Sam Spencer, class of 1940, was president of Davidson when the transformational decision was made to become a coeducational college. It was a bold and contentious move, but Dr. Spencer was confident that it was a decision that would help ensure the preeminence of Davidson among elite colleges and universities. And for those of us who knew Mrs. Spencer, it was clear that her example and her partnership encouraged Dr. Spencer to move forward with full coeducation. We all remember Dr. Spencer and Mrs. Spencer for their incredible vision and leadership and friendship. And we are honored that their daughter, Ellen Spencer Henchen, is joining us today for this program. Please welcome Ellen. Ellen, would you stand up? There's that one. Thank you, Ellen. And thank you to the Spencers. So speaking of pioneers and bridge builders and smart and successful women, our next session should be a real treat for all of us as we hear from 4 ceiling shatterers about their journey through life after Davidson. It is such an honor for me to be able to introduce our moderator for this discussion, Kristen Hills Bradbury, Davidson class of 1985. In addition to being a longtime friend of mine, Kristen was formerly the Vice President for College Relations at Davidson, I believe the first woman to serve in that position. She also served on the Board of Trustees here as well, chairing the Presidential Search Committee that brought us now President Emerita Carol Quillen. Kristen also provided bold leadership for the steering committee for the Davidson Trust and amazing leadership for the record-breaking $250 million Let Learning Be Cherished campaign. This woman can recognize talent, and wow, can she ever raise money. During her 8 years on the Board of Trustees, Kristen and her colleagues wrestled with many weighty and often quite controversial issues: budget, curriculum, governance, admissions, the list goes on. But if you were maybe a student here in 2008, anybody who was a student here in 2008, or the parent of a student in 2008, you will likely remember and be super grateful for the not one bit controversial trustee decision to personally pick up the tab for all Davidson students who wanted to go to Detroit to cheer on the Cats. Led by baby-faced Steph Curry during their magical Elite Eight run. Was that not an especially great day to be a Wildcat? Kristen's faithful devotion to alma mater and to her community continues. It's remarkable. And I should also mention that she is a proud Davidson mom. Kristen continues to make an impact as a strategic advisor to nonprofits in the Charlotte area and beyond. Please join me in welcoming Kristen, who will then introduce our panelists.
Wow. I think it's still morning, right? Good morning. What an honor. I am so excited about the conversation that you're going to get to hear in a moment. We've had some chance to catch up with these remarkable women this week, and I'm going to introduce them to you now. First, Julia Edwards Ainsley, class of '09, is the Homeland Security correspondent for NBC News. She covers immigration at the U.S. southern border, the root causes of mass migration, cybersecurity, counter-narcotics operations, and the inner workings of the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. Next, one many of you know, Ann Clark, class of '80, was the first female superintendent of Charlotte-Mecklenburg schools. Anne was recognized as the 1994 National Principal of the Year. She spent 35 years in public education as a special education teacher, principal, chief academic officer, deputy superintendent, and superintendent. Next, Anna Catherine Clemens Clay, class of '01, is a national freelance writer, assistant professor of practice, in the Media Studies Department at the University of Virginia. Previously, she worked for 10 years as a writer, reporter, and producer for ESPN. And last, Olivia Ware, class of '78. She's a biopharma executive and board member, corporate board member. As an early member of the team that built the oncology franchise at Genentech Inc., Olivia played a key role in the product launch of several of the world's largest revenue-producing oncology drugs. And get started. Thank y'all. Quick housekeeping. We're going to have a conversation amongst us with some questions that we have prepared, and then we're going to open the floor to Q&A from the audience. What I know for sure is that Davidson people are smart, and you know the difference between a comment and a question. So I'm going to ask, if you find yourself thinking, I have a really important comment, if you could save that for lunch, because they're all going to be here for lunch. Great conversation will happen there. And sometimes you do need a little bit of context for your question, and that's fine. But if you could just keep it pretty brief, and then we can get to the question, and then we can hear from them. So I'll ask for shared recognition of that. Okay. In our conversation earlier this week, we talked a lot about representation matters. Olivia, can you speak to that a little bit, both as a woman and a woman of color in your career?
Thanks, Kristen. First of all, it's just fantastic to be on a panel with all these amazing women. So I feel really honored and really humbled. I would say that first. You're right. Representation does matter. From the generation that I'm in, I'm often the only or one of few. And including at Davidson, when I came here, I had been at a predominantly white school, but at Davidson, I was usually the only woman and the only person of color in my classes and in most situations. And that's a very daunting and intimidating experience. And what usually happens, and people expressed this, I think, at our panel last night, it's sometimes you're not fully yourself when you're in an intimidating and daunting environment. And I'm sure there were times at Davidson when I was not realizing my full potential because of being an only or one of few. That really speaks to, but you have to be in the room where it happens, as Manuel Lynn Miranda would say. So that's sort of first steps. But that experience really speaks to the fact that critical mass is also really important. This is critical mass now, you were wondering. And I happened to be very fortunate at one point in my career at Genentech when we were starting up our oncology business, and all three of the senior women in our commercial organization, all three senior executives were women, head of sales, head of marketing, and our president, who was a Black woman from biopharma. And it was an incredible experience. And I saw through critical mass, wow, the opportunities that women got. And it was probably a combination of us showing up to our full potential and having women who saw us as able and capable to do that. So it was really taught me the importance of having more than just one or a few. And then finally, as I had became a more senior person in our organization, I really saw the benefit of having someone who has experienced what I had experienced as a person of color, as a person who lived in as an underrepresented person. I got the opportunity to be in the room where there might be unconscious bias, sometimes overt bias, and I'm able to speak up to that, help people recognize it. And sometimes by simply being in the room, my male colleagues also say, wait a minute, they notice it more too. So the final thing I'll say about representation that sort of speaks to nice to be in the room, nice to be able to participate when you're in the room. And finally, as women and people of color, being able to be the person who represents for the rest of the organization that it's possible. It's really hard to believe you're going to be a senior person if you don't see another senior person.
Thank you.
You know, we hear about unicorns, but you know, it's hard to believe they really exist when you don't see one. And so as I became more senior and I saw that, and especially as I became a director and I was in organizations where, you know, I'm not really in a position where I'm going to be fired or I'm worried about my job really. It's amazing to me how women, people of color come up and go, just having you here, just seeing somebody who has natural hair, who looks like me, makes me believe that the organization is not just talking the talk, they're walking the walk. And knowing that you're in the boardroom just makes me feel really comfortable. So it's about representation, absolutely vitally important. You can't participate if you're not in the room. You need to get to the table. And when you're at the table, you need to feel like you're being included. And it's our job as women to do that. I'm fortunate that the roles that I have, especially as a director, are the result of two amazing women. So they, who get asked to do everything in biopharma, finally said, you know, call this woman, she'll be great. Because one of the first questions you get asked as a director is, have you ever been a director of a publicly traded company? So to get out of that catch-22 can be really hard. So I was fortunate to have two women, one Black, one white, who said, you know, I can't do it, but I have a great woman for you. So now in biopharma, we're kind of saying, you know what? People are always calling senior people and people who already have the job to say, will you do it? So we say, let's recommend another woman. Let's look for women in our sphere who we can recommend and push forward. Guys do that all the time. And that's just because people tend to recommend people that they know and that they're close to. Why wouldn't you? You want to recommend people you know something about. We know something about other women. It's our job to make sure that happens. So
That's right.
representation, it matters.
So, yes, that's what. And I believe, Anna Catherine, you had said that you have students who take your class, a lot more women take your class. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I started teaching, first of all, echo Olivia, amazing to be here. Anytime to be back at Davidson is a treat, but especially learning and seeing about so many amazing women is awesome. So when I started teaching at UVA 8 years ago, I wanted to take my experience, the sports industry, the media industry is about 90% male, 10% female today. And when I worked in it, it was about 95% male, 5% female. And so when I started teaching, I assumed I would get mostly male students. UVA population is pretty split for cisgendered male, cisgendered female. And I was surprised to see I had a lot of female students. And after that first semester, I had one student who she's now a producer at ESPN LA. And she wrote me a note, a handwritten note, which if there are any students here, please continue the art of handwritten notes. And she said to me that she had planned to be a lawyer. She was in her second year at the time, but then seeing me and my enthusiasm and my passion for sports storytelling and hearing my stories about being a woman in such a male-dominated sphere where I often early on, to Olivia's point, would try to make myself small or invisible because I would be the only woman in the locker room, the only woman in the clubhouse, at least from a media perspective. And then as time went on and I felt more empowered, I really wanted to empower my students from the moment I started teaching. And she said the combination of the passion for what I do and then seeing a woman do it, she actually wrote in the note, if you can see it, you can be it. And she said, now I don't want to be a lawyer. I really want to work in sports video production. And you make me feel like I can do that. And to Olivia's other point, what I try to do with my students and have continued to do is really connect them to people in the sports media industry, male or female, but often a woman who I know might be more inclined to want to hire them or to give them that chance. And now, I mean, I'm really proud to say of my students who have gone on to work in sports media, I have more female students working in the industry now than male, and hopefully changing that 90-10 to like a 85-15.
That is a perfect segue. I know you've got some shocking stats, Anne, on education.
Yes, and my situation is just the opposite of what Olivia was talking about. And as I was driving over here this morning, it wasn't lost on me that 70% of the teachers in K-12 education, public or private in this country, 76% are women. But when you flip that to the percentage of superintendents in K-12 education, it's 24%. So representation looked very different for me in terms of being the first female superintendent in a district that was 124 years old at the time I became superintendent. And it really struck me how important representation is when I was walking in the neighborhood and all of a sudden this car pulled over, which was a little alarming at first because there was sort of a quick switch and pulled up right beside me. And the person rolled down the window and said, "Ms. Clark, I just want to say thank you." And she turned out she was a teacher in the school district. And she said, "I just am so excited that you're our superintendent. You know, it's great." I said, "Well, we've had plenty of superintendents that have been a teacher." And she said, "You've been a teacher here and you're a woman." And it struck me then, it was not a teacher that I even knew, but just the fact that she would take the time to pull her car over and say, it's so great as a teacher to see someone leading our district who was a part of the core business of our enterprise, which is teaching and learning. And if you think about worldwide companies, what worldwide company wouldn't have somebody be deemed eligible to lead the core business of that company? And yet, when I was a chief academic officer, I had a superintendent tell me, "And a school board will never hire you as a female chief academic officer." And he did it in a kind way and said, "You're going to have deputy superintendent in front of your name before a school board is going to take you seriously as a female educator." So representation does matter. And what I do today is help young, talented female educators that are senior leaders in districts become superintendents across this country, because undoubtedly many of them, like me, have led the core business, but haven't had that chance to take that wealth of experience and lead a district.
Thank you for that. Julia, when we were talking earlier and we were giving you credit for being a woman in this highly male-dominated field, and you did mention there were a significant woman across the hall. So talk a little bit about representation for you in that field and also the choices that you made to pick the topics that you wanted to stay with.
That's true. So for me, I feel so lucky in so many ways. I mean, I'm coming along just a little further behind, not much further behind you all, but there are some ceiling shatters that have already come through national media and news. I sit right across the hall from Andrea Mitchell, who talks about how she used to go on air and she had to be makeup ready, but there was no one there to do her makeup. Well, I can show up to work with wet hair and people will take care of it. So that's lovely. There are a lot of women who are on national network news all the time. But the topics I cover with national security and homeland security, primarily at the border, it's mainly the men that I'm interviewing. They're law enforcement agents who are putting their lives on the line, take their jobs really seriously, and for a long time are really used to being interviewed by men. There are more women getting into this field, but I think what I try to figure out is, first I try to check, my own privilege, the fact that I got to come to this amazing school, learn, get such a great education, get to where I am, go to graduate school. And so first of all, when I'm interviewing women at the border who have, come through the Darien Gap from Venezuela, risked everything to come to the border, I need to think about how can I put myself in the most empathetic situation to tell their story. That's what I'm there to do, as well as tell the story of the agent who's out there trying to do their best every day, as well as tell the story of the landowner who might be worried about the fact that we have an increase in immigration, to try to balance all of that. So what I'm trying to do is to remember, first of all, of course, my own privilege, how lucky I am, but to try to make myself stronger as a woman. And where that really has changed is motherhood. And it made my job harder, and I think it made me better at my job at the same time. So 1 and a 3-year-old, and have my husband to thank for taking care of them when I'm on very long work trips. But I think there used to be a part of me that thought, I am so good at not being biased. I can interview women. I was covering family separation in 2018 without shedding a tear, and just really getting into the documents and why they did this and who's accountable, and loved doing that. And then coming back and interviewing people who have been through this after having children, there's something that has changed in my brain, and it's sometimes harder to hold back those tears. So does that make me biased? I don't think so. I think it's made me stronger. But it is harder because I think a lot of the men who are down there who have kids at home, they don't have the same pressures to rush back and make it to the birthday party, to make it to the ballet recital. And so I want to continue to be representative, so that representation does matter, so that someone who's in a hard situation, whether they be a migrant or a business owner or whatever they're going through, has an empathetic ear, someone to talk to. A lot of times women are more likely to share their stories, especially if they've been victims of assault, with a woman. And my producer who I travel with is also a woman. And I think that we're stronger because of it. But I do think that we have added challenges, because there's still, I won't necessarily say ceiling shattering all the time, because there have been so many people who have come before us, but there's still some more trailblazing that has to be done. And so it's a matter of trying to use my gender, my experience, as a strength.
Awesome. There was something you said that made me think about your experience, not always, but a few times, I think, when you were at ESPN and people assumed you were the massage therapist or physical therapist, or
Yeah.
can you speak to that?
Yeah, so when I got to ESPN, I worked at ESPN the magazine, which no longer exists, but it was the magazine arm of ESPN, and that was a very diverse staff, which was great. Like, there were women, there were people of color. It was not a microcosm of what sports media and sports is, right? So then the first time I went into NFL locker rooms or Major League Baseball clubhouses, often as the only female writer, I was very surprised to find athletes who didn't think I was a reporter, who literally, one of them assumed I was the massage therapist, went to lay on the massage therapy table, told me he was ready, and I was like, are you wanting to be interviewed there? And so it was a challenge initially to kind of get past maybe others' assumptions about who I was and why I was there. And it was also challenging because a lot of the males working around me, not all of them, I had one amazing colleague who's here somewhere, Dave Fleming, who's a mentor to me and incredible, but a lot of the men, when I would come into these situations, male reporters, male personnel for teams, kind of wanted to challenge me, right? As in, maybe you don't need to be here. So when's the last time this team won the World Series? Or when's the last time Kirk Cousins threw for 500 yards? And at first it was uncomfortable. And I would say, kind of to what Julia was saying, like, I found Davidson wonderful and challenging. Like, academically for me, it was not easy at Davidson. It was a challenge, but I always liked pushing myself in that way and being challenged. And honestly, one of the things that drew me to sports journalism specifically was knowing, I didn't realize how few women there were, but knowing that I wouldn't be the majority and that it wouldn't always be a comfortable, welcoming environment, right? And so for me, the more I started reporting and becoming the person I was and the journalist I was, even before I was a mom, was also figuring out how to meet that challenge, right? Because I thought, I think some of these men just aren't used to seeing a woman in this role, or they aren't comfortable with it, or they assume they know more or have more right to be here. And so I'm just going to meet that with respect and with preparation, but also knowing I do deserve to be here, right? Like I worked really hard to get here. I work really hard in preparation for every story, whoever I'm interviewing. I will say when it was Stephen Curry, it was always a joy, never a challenge. And so I just would try to channel that, right? Like, what do you do when you're faced with a challenge or a situation that isn't always comfortable for you? Well, remember, you deserve to be here. As Olivia was saying, you deserve to be in this room. Work really hard, and then let the stories that you tell and that you share really help show that as well. And so the more that I did that, and as time went on, there were still instances, as recently as 2018, I had an NBA locker room attendant who wouldn't let me into the locker room during the media time before the game because he said, I don't think women should be in here right now. And so I had to go get another supervisor and, you know, sort of make sure he understood that, in fact, it was okay for me to be in there. But I think kind of feeling to myself, like, I do deserve this, and I can respectfully show that I deserve this. And then again, the more that other women were in that space, I mean, anytime I would see another female reporter, I would immediately go talk to her, especially if she was younger. And I wanted to try to empower her and make her feel less isolated in the way that I did early on. And always make sure to say, I'm Anna Catherine, and I'm the journalist here to speak to you today.
Perfect. So we're talking a little bit about leveraging it. Olivia, talk about how being in a field dominated by European white male, your position in the world, how does that help you in leading cross-functional teams?
Thanks. It's and Anne's point about the number of women in leadership positions in academia is very a parallel across every industry. So I really don't have to be talking about biopharma to note that at junior entry levels, women are at parity with men, but by the time you get to the top, it becomes that 80-20, that 90-10, that sometimes even smaller as we get higher and higher up. And so the other thing that's really interesting about this dynamic is that it is sort of settled law that diverse teams, diverse environments are way more effective than non-diverse ones. That's kind of, there's a million studies out there to show that. So companies that have diverse workforces and teams that are diverse are financially more successful than the ones that are not. So I enter my business in biopharma. I'm there to increase value for the shareholders, but more importantly, we're there sometimes to get life-saving medicines to patients. So what we do is vitally important on a whole other level that goes beyond business and money. So my team members come into it really motivated and have high passion. My job as a leader is to get the best out of them. And to get the best out of them, they have to feel that they're seen and that they're heard and that they matter. Because when they're doing that, they're giving me 150%. And that's what we need to do the very hard job we have to do sometimes in biopharma. And because I'm a Black woman and I have the lived experience of living through Jim Crow South, segregated schools, being the one, the only, the one of few, the one of maybe one person in the room, I know what it feels like to not be seen, not be heard, and for people to think I don't matter. That's happened my entire life, including here with some people at Davidson. But I know that when I'm in that space, that I perform better and I want my teams to perform better. So that lived experience I had makes me really attuned to making sure that people, when they're working with me, they feel that, because then I'm unlocking their superpower, and that's my job as a team leader.
Love it. Thank you. I'm going back to representation again. And you had told me a story about you were building a team. There was somebody who had a hard time with the fact that there were so many women on the team.
Yeah, I had the unique opportunity to open a brand new high school in Charlotte. and hire over 200 faculty and staff for that school. And at one point, when we were a couple weeks away from opening, my supervisor from the district office called and said, "Ann, there is some growing concern in the central office that your leadership team has all female assistant principals. And we just learned that you hired a female athletic director." And I really didn't even really know what to say. I was sort of stunned because when you're handed this opportunity to literally start with no one and hire everybody that walks in the door, it's an extraordinary opportunity to find the very best talent out there. And I knew that I had done the best as I could in that way. And I said, "Well, we're hired. They're all hired at this point, and we're ready for the opening of school, and I hope I can count on your support." And then I had to make this decision in terms of whether I was going to even share that with my team. And I chose not to share the question, but just to share, we have this amazing opportunity here to show the strength of an all-female leadership team. At the time, I was the only female high school principal in the district, and there were like 28 high schools. So there was this added opportunity there as well. And I never shared it with them, but I shared the opportunity for other women in the district to have the opportunity to be assistant principals at a high school, and for someone to be a female athletic director. Because everybody in this room knows that it matters not about your gender in terms of going to plays, being at athletic events, breaking up a fight in the cafeteria. We probably have a little more finesse than men anyway, when it comes to that. But I think that experience and one other experience, I became an elementary principal in Charlotte when I was 27, which was relatively young to move into that leadership role. And I was sitting in the interview with 6 men and 1 female who was a senior leader in the district. And one of the interviewees asked me the question, "Ms. Clark, what do you know about transportation?" And thanks to Davidson College, I had been a bus driver for Project Excel, which was a program for Charlotte students on the campus in the summer. And I had to drive from Davidson all the way out to the Lake campus. And if you remember that drive, when you're heading down 115, you have to make an incredibly sharp left turn up a hill. And I did that for like 50 days in the summer. So he was expecting me, I think, to say buses are yellow and have 4 black wheels. And instead I said, I've have a bus driver's license and I've driven a bus for a number of years, and went on to talk about my knowledge of transportation. And at the end of that interview, the woman walked out with me and she pointed her finger at me and she said, "Don't ever let men think that you can't do a job. You are going to be a great leader in this district." I was like 27 years old. I was like, woo. But those were the kinds of experiences that I had from very early in my career, and then 30 years into my career as I stepped into the superintendency. So, and I think about all the women that are teaching in the Charlotte-Mecklenburg schools and across this country, and it inspires me every day.
So, Ann, I know for a fact that you have mentored so many people, men and women, in the education ecosystem in Charlotte. So thank you for that. You mentioned the woman who, at 27, was essentially mentoring you. When we were talking earlier, Julia, you had a really helpful distinction between mentoring, networking. Can you just talk a little bit about that? And then I'd love for y'all to jump in, and it's important for this whole topic, so.
Sure. Well, I was, and my networking in journalism comes back to Davidson. I was so thankful that I came here and not UNC. I was from Raleigh. A lot of my friends were going to UNC. They had this great journalism program. I knew I wanted to be a journalist, but I came here. Of course, you know, we have an English major, and I was a psych major. I can get into that, but I was able to network through Davidson alums in Charlotte who are working at Charlotte Observer, Charlotte Magazine, calling them, asking if I could come help out, what they could do, because it was a little less competitive than all the journalism students at UNC trying to get jobs at News and Observer. But what I learned then, and something that I think I also learned on the other side of it now as a mentor, is that there's a difference between networking and mentoring, and that networking can be incredibly valuable, even if it's more short term. And so a lot of times I mentor students who went to my graduate school, and it's called mentoring, but I get one a quarter. So that's quite many now after all these years. And I think that it's fine to have a coffee with someone to, check up on the phone, every so often. A mentorship is really a relationship that grows. And sometimes it's best when it's within your own company or your own more specific industry. I've mentioned Andrea Mitchell. She's been someone who's been incredibly helpful to me over the years, but we're there at NBC together. I can walk into her office. She could do the same to me. I'm able to bring something to that relationship. I could get her information she might need on her show. Whereas I think networking, sometimes I think we're asking too much of the people we network with if we're expecting them to be mentors. And so I just want to emphasize that I think it's great to be able to reach out for that purpose.
So I totally forgot you were a psych major, so was I, and I meant to tell you that I got a really lovely text from Cole Barton.
Oh.
Here today, but
He's a big fan, and
yes.
we still message. I think he's a big Morning Joe watcher, so I still get to talk to him whenever I go on. He's wonderful.
I know, Olivia, you've had important mentors.
Yeah, I think I really echo what Julia is saying, because we all get asked to mentor a lot of people. I'm sure people in the audience do too. And it's just impossible to sort of carry that burden. And sometimes it's really just a time factor, because if you're working or in an organization, you're sometimes being asked to coach or mentor someone in the org. So I agree. I find networking to be very, very valuable, because I network with people who are not just in biopharma working in commercial or drug development, but I might network with somebody who's a CFO and understands investments or financing. Or I might network with somebody who's in communications, because I want to understand better how to message. So networking can cover a broad swath of things that I know a lot about, or maybe a little bit about, or just sort of point me in a direction when I'm thinking of going in a different direction. I also just want to emphasize the importance of finding sponsors within your organization. When I'm mentoring, coaching someone, I'm not necessarily maybe in their part of the org where I can advocate for them to take a new position or be considered for something. And both men and women, men can be incredible sponsors for people in organizations. So look for people, not just other women, but strong men who really have an interest in being a sponsor. When you've worked with somebody, you've done a great job with them, make sure that they're willing to step up and be a sponsor for you. They should. Very often in organizations, women say, you keep getting like assignments. Can you do this? Can you take on this role? Can you do this volunteer thing? And that's great. But sometimes you're doing all that stuff and you're not getting you're not going to get any payback. Better to say, I'm going to say no. I'm going to do a really great job at my day job, and then expect that somebody's going to be a sponsor for you. Somebody's going to advocate for you based on that work experience. So I think as women, we don't often raise our hand and say, hey, I'm here. And I really encourage as a coach, mentor, or sponsor to say, don't wait to be asked. Raise your hand and say, I can do this.
I think it's also like with all of those pieces, like building community and like building those bridges. So like, I know at least in the sports media community, it's almost like the Davidson Alumni Network. It's a wonderful network. It's like a family, man or woman. You can reach out to someone and you have that connection, right? And it's almost like this instant relationship. And I know for sports media, it's not a very big community, honestly, once you're in it. And for me, once I stopped working full-time at ESPN, my children were 2 and 6 months. And when I was transitioning into teaching, I then started freelance writing. And almost every editor that I started to write for and continue to write for is someone I worked with at ESPN. So I do regular freelancing for the New York Times when they had a sports section until very recently. And my editor there was Elena Bergeron, who was one of the first writers I worked with at ESPN. Same thing with Men's Health and GQ Sports. And so it's building that community and investing in it, right? And then now, because I do have a lot of those connections in sports media, Davidson alumni, some UVA now as well, when my students are coming to me and saying, what opportunities are there? How can I find sponsors, mentors, and build those connections? I say, well, here's this whole world, right, that I can help connect you to. And as long as you don't burn those bridges and you continue to build them, it's like, it's doing the work you didn't even know you were doing, right? And then you just have this whole wide swath. And I think for women especially, it's almost like a comfort to know that, right? As you go out, like believe in yourself and then also believe in these people, that whatever this community is, they do want to help you.
Yeah, I think, can I just
Yeah,
add
don't- yeah,
one thing?
definitely.
I think that's so critical. And Julie, I hope you'll share the story you shared a few minutes ago backstage about the young woman in your group. You know, when we work, there's like the people we work for, there's our peers, and there's the people who work for us. And I'm at a place where sometimes the people who worked for me like 10 years ago will go, she'd make a great director for our company. They're senior people. So, you know, you have building community is vital. And sometimes the person who can really be helpful to you may not be your boss. It may be the person who works for you or works for them. And so you really want to, like attracts like in work. If you show up authentically and in a genuine sense, you're going to attract those people to you. And the people who aren't, at the end of the day, they really don't matter anyway. So you can forget about them. So you want to be your authentic, genuine self. You will find a community full of other genuine people who want to help.
So she mentioned
I
a
want to know
little,
what the story
it was
was.
the intern, the intern.
Young American University.
Yes.
Oh, just, we're talking about the value of going back to work, something that I've been working on a lot, or a lot of media organizations are working on a lot, is looking at the rise of anti-Semitism and Islamophobia that's happening since began on October 7th in Israel and Gaza. And I happened to be talking about how I really wanted to connect with American University because there was an incident there. And right then, an intern happened to overhear my conversation, walked over and said, I'm the editor of the paper there, and I know the students who experienced that. And that's a time where we've talked a lot about how it's hard to go back to in-person work. I find it hard sometimes as a mother. I would love to be able to stay home and see my children more, but especially for people, you know, this happens for women, for anyone who needs to be women, entry level, people of color, everyone needs to be visible. Representation matters, visual representation matters. So to be able to be in an office where you can come in and jump into that conversation, I find really useful. And another thing on this, one time I was just starting at NBC. I was behind one of our head correspondents in line at the Amtrak station, and she was talking to another woman, and I don't even think she realized I had started to work there. I now know her very well. And she was talking for a really long time. She's like, you know what? These young women, they all want mentors and they don't want to do the work. And it took every bit of me not to be like, hey, will you be my mentor? I just started, but I've taken that to heart to think that it really is a symbiotic relationship, and it should be that way.
So Anne, before we open up the audience, mentoring, networking, being mentoring, how would you add into this part of the conversation?
I think both are really important, and I had the opportunity to experience both and also create both through. And one of the things that I did is started a group of female leaders in the Charlotte-Mecklenburg schools called the Red Jacket Group, and it was taken out of a book where it talked about when you are the only woman in a top tier of an organization, you wear a red jacket. So you stand out, a good Davidson red. And over time, what can happen is that boardroom or that senior team changes as there are more red jackets in the room. It's really a symbolic thing. But so I looked around the district at a variety of levels of the organization, people that were part of my senior team already, principals, assistant principals, teacher leaders, heads of departments within the central office, and brought them together as a senior leadership group over a series of years for professional learning leadership opportunities. And it is still a group that I am closely connected to, and it's been fun to see those women through that networking, learning together, supporting each other as they had opportunities to move into new roles, see where they have all gone and continue to go in their leadership journey. So for me, that opportunity to bring women together to acknowledge their potential as leaders or their great job and leadership roles, I think is really important. My personal mentor was a white male that was my first principal, who had the courage when I was 25 years old and a classroom teacher to ask me to be the principal for the day while he was gone on vacation for 3 days. And if you really think about that, that was probably really not a great decision to put a 25-year-old, 3 years out of Davidson in charge of an elementary school. But he did it. And it was that trust and belief in me that caused me to realize at the end of those 3 days, while I was exhausted, that I had really enjoyed it. I had been energized. I really was thriving in that opportunity. And he continued to be a mentor for me for my 34 years. When I went into the central office, he was my boss again and really supported me in opportunities again in that way. And then when I was superintendent, he had retired, but he was a part of what I called my kitchen cabinet of trusted leaders and colleagues that I could turn to and know I would get an honest answer, and that he would hold the mirror up and say, is this who you want to be? Incredibly valuable mentor relationship.
And Julia, you had mentioned your first mentor in your career, at least, is, I believe, the husband of a
Yes.
alumna who is here.
And I had to see Liz Clayson at some point this weekend, and her husband, Fred Clayson Kelly, was my first mentor. I mean, really went above and beyond. I can't believe how much time I took of his, but I would go down to the Charlotte Observer newsroom practically every week by the time I was a senior here. And my lovely professor, Dr. Shereen Campbell, if she's here, would let me leave class early to go. And so that was very nice. And I just got to sit there and be part of the Metro desk and watch as he dug through databases and as he interviewed people. And I got to go down to the DNC headquarters on the night that Obama was elected and interview people who had come through the civil rights movement and never thought that they would see a Black man elected president. I mean, but without that, that all started because of the girl who lived next to me on Base Belk had interned with Liz that summer. I said I wanted to get into journalism, and she said, well, you should call Liz's husband. I mean, it all started in this union at a table right upstairs. So you never know how that would come together.
I have one more question for the panel. We are going to let the audience ask questions. Is there anything before we do that y'all want to add to the mix? Okay. Do we have our runners ready? Alan? Okay, so if you have a question, we've got mics, and do tell us your name. And if there is a person on the panel that you want specifically to focus on, let us know that too.
Good morning. Thanks for all this very thought-provoking and wonderful observation. My name is Cecily Craighill Davis. I'm the class of 91. And I'm looking at the image of the shattered glass ceiling behind you. I want to ask about the glass cliff, which is this idea or a concept that women are often given assignments that are very difficult or will have a high probability of failure. And then if it does fail, it's like, well, look at who we gave it to. And if it does succeed, it's like a, miracle of some sort. I guess I'm asking if you have either experienced it or observed it and what we could do about it.
Who wants? I know you have an answer.
Definitely have many of those opportunities. For those of you who have lived in Charlotte a long time, you certainly are aware of our history with segregation, desegregation, and the journey that the district has been on. And when I was the chief academic officer, I had the wonderful opportunity to be handed, there were 13 schools that were closed in Charlotte in June by board vote. And by the end of June, the superintendent who had made those recommendations had resigned. And I was the chief academic officer in charge of teaching and learning, our core business, and was asked to lead the transition and all that goes with that of employees being reassigned, students being reassigned, closure of the actual facilities. And I guess the public will say whether that was done well or not, but I knew that that was an opportunity to succeed or fail, and really relied on relationships. Having been in the district for over 25 years, you develop some street credibility. You know, what that credibility is another story, but just the opportunity and the challenge to try to make the best and fairest decisions for employees and kids and our community, with the crushing need to close or decision to close those schools, and what that meant to those communities to have a facility that was a part of their community closed. It tapped into every one of my life experiences. And I won't say it was a joyful opportunity, but it was a privilege to lead.
Any other responses? Other questions?
Hi, my name is Molly Johnson, class of 94. I heard you all touch on this a little bit in the comments up until now. And I think often when you are first or trailblazers, you are put in a position to speak for all women, to give commentary on the female experience. I have been very encouraged of late, let's just say of late, that sometimes we're not asked to do that anymore, or we choose not to do that anymore. And I'm curious how you have discerned that. If you still feel any responsibility to kind of educate others. I'm not going to point fingers at my male counterparts, but that's often the case. So especially as we're seeing more red, jackets in the boardroom and so forth, how are you grappling with that?
John?
Happy to take
Yeah.
that. Yeah, I think that's a really great question. It happens a lot for people of color to be like the person who speaks up. I find now there's really not an excuse for there being only one woman in the boardroom or one person of color in the boardroom. If that's where you're at, people aren't trying hard enough. It's like, so I think it's important maybe to look at the situation you're getting into. And if it's a situation where that's an expectation, there's probably another dynamic going on that you probably want to avoid. So when people now ask me if I want to take on an assignment or I want to join a board, the first thing I ask is, tell me about the other people that are on the board and tell me why you think I would add value. I have actually had interviews where a person said, we don't have any women. There's like 8 guys, or we don't have any person of color. And we felt like we needed one. That's not a good answer. Especially when you're talking to someone, I'm always going to be a Black woman, but I think I have capabilities on the business side that at least try to pretend like you think that's important. So I can then, of course, very gracefully say, I'm probably not the right person for you. So I think that we are at a place now where we're past like getting in the room. And the important thing then, as we talked about, is see if there is critical mass to support you being able to be your best self in that environment. And so now I find young people of color, young Black people, young women will call me and say, tell me about this organization. And is this a place where I'm going to have the opportunity to really grow to my fullest potential? Because nobody wants to be a token. People want to do real work. And so I think, if that's the expectation, you're probably in the wrong place with people who, as I mentioned before, are probably not going to matter.
I will say when I started in national sports media, I felt that pressure a lot. If I saw I was the only woman in the press conference in the clubhouse, I felt so much pressure. And so I was like, I have to represent all women who want to do this, right? And I had this internal dialogue that almost distracted me from what I was doing. And then I remember like early on, a male media member came up to me in a clubhouse, and I was 25, 26 when I started at ESPN. And he was like, so you're here to find a husband, huh? And I was like, I kind of paused, and then I was like, which one do you think? Right? And then I was like, actually, no, I'm here as a journalist for ESPN, the magazine. And because I wasn't a beat writer, which means you're always with a team, I was always going different places, popping in and out. And so the more I saw even one more woman, two more women, it eased it a little. And then what I found myself doing more was trying to empower the women who were there to feel less of that pressure. So I would literally go up to them and start talking to them. Oh, where are you from? How long have you been doing this? I know with my students now, I get a lot of calls on that mentoring networking side when they enter sports media where they're like, this happened. I don't know what to do. How do I handle this? Because there's a lot of attrition of women, not just in sports media, but I saw a statistic recently where more women actually go to journalism school, but then within the first 4 years of the industry, way more women have left. And some of that might be for family, different reasons. But now I do see more women, and then I also try to really make them feel that they deserve to be in the room and that they don't have to represent all women, that they can represent themselves. And the last thing I would say to that is I also felt more comfortable just being me and leaning into who I am, not needing to be this cardboard expectation of a woman and working in sports media, not to find a husband, but to work. My husband is a Latin teacher, by the way, so definitely not a professional athlete. But to let other women feel, be yourself and let that shine through, because that is actually what makes you great at what you do. Don't shy away from it or try to conform to what they expect a woman in this role to be.
Can I pick up on it? You said two things that I love. First, the idea of authenticity is really growing. And I feel like in a way in the past 5 years, even, I came from print to TV. They worked with me on my accent. My grandfather from Rocky Mount would certainly not think that I have a Southern accent. They thought I do. And so, we'll work on, what should your accent look like these days? That's a hard call. But I think, the more you can be your authentic self, and there's a debate too about how much of your real self you show in the office. Can you cry in a board meeting? I don't know. But I would say in terms of representation and to answer the question of, speaking for all women, I often find younger women in those networking, mentoring in those conversations want us to have all the answers, and I just don't. So I get a lot of questions from young women who have not yet had families, who want to have a family and want to figure out if they should stay in this career path. Well, how do you do it? And a lot of times we're having these conversations where we're driving 6 hours across the state of Texas. And I'm not really sure how I'm making this work. Right now, I'm like eating breakfast. My breakfast is Twizzlers, and I just threw up on the side of the road because I have morning sickness, and we're going to make it to the border. And that's not having it all figured out, but we're going to try to figure this out together. So I find that there's this idea that women who are in their jobs have it together because of the positions they're in. And really, I think showing some vulnerability, the authenticity can actually go a lot further.
So I'm going to come to the last question I have for you, and you're sort of touching on it with these last two comments, but as you think about who you are in your career now, what is that part of you that you've leaned into that you also know you had when you were a Davidson woman? A woman here at Davidson. You're still a Davidson woman.
Davidson was hard for me. I will say that first and foremost, a lot of people in my family came here and loved it and did really well academically, and it was hard. I feel really lucky that I can now come back and sit on this stage, but it prepared me in a really great way. And I think it was the resiliency and the grit. They talk about that a lot now. They try to figure out what will make people successful in the long run. And Davidson taught me grit, and it was long nights in the library, or it might be trying to find that friend on the freshman hall and you feel like you're not quite clicking with people. But it was 4 years of working hard, kind of refining who I was, and then being able to take that out in the real world. And there are some times, this time last year, I was in Colombia doing a drug raid, and I still think I was more stressed out sitting in chambers with a little blue book. So that's how Davidson That's how Davidson prepared me. And I think also Davidson encourages us to be curious. And I try to continue to ask questions everywhere I go.
Anne, what would you add?
Um, uh, I too, I won't say I struggled at Davidson, but I worked incredibly hard. I had a professor tell me early on, I was dead set on being an English major. And he said, you're just not a writer. And I did graduate from Davidson College proudly with a BA in English. And I give credit to Randy Nelson and Gil Holland for helping me be a good writer. But, you know, I was a part, as many of the people in this audience, of many firsts at Davidson that really gave me the confidence to put my voice in the space. So was a part of helping to start Rusk House. I was on the first field hockey team at Davidson, and I'll never forget showing up in class in my field hockey skirt, which, if you know, those are pretty short. And I think the professor's hair just stood up on end as I walked into the classroom. I thought it was really great that I was coming to class instead of skipping class because we had a game and the van was leaving like 10 minutes after the class was over, but I'm not sure he fully appreciated that. He was a fabulous professor, by the way. But there were those kinds of experiences of being a part of so many firsts and putting the female presence and voice on this campus that really propelled me forward and did give me the confidence. The Davidson diploma is what I'm proudest of all the things that I've done.
Oh,
That's great. I would say kind of two parts. One, similarly, as I said earlier, academically, it was a challenge. But one of the things I loved when I got to Davidson was seeing people from so many different lived experiences. Like my freshman roommate, Shalini Unikrishnan, was from New Delhi, India. She'd never set foot in the US before arriving to Davidson. And I like learning her story. It started to make me curious, honestly, about other people, which, you know, journalism is sort of a natural segue to being curious about people and just the connections that happened at Davidson. I think now one thing I always am happy to hear is people always say to me, you're a connector, you connect people. And I really think that started here. You know, it was an intimate setting, but one you could be really curious about people, ask questions, learn things. So when I wasn't like sweating over a test, which was often holed up in the library, I loved to be curious and learn more about the people around me. And I think that really propelled me forward in ways like seen and unseen to me at the time. And then the other thing I'd say is now, as an assistant professor, I design my classes so similarly to my Davidson classes, maybe not as academically rigorous, but certainly the format, the structure, and the style. And I just say, like, I'm basically copying what my undergrad professors did. And my students, I'm fortunate, like my classes are very popular. There's usually a lot of wait lists, and a lot of the academics in my department are like, what are you doing in there? Like, what's going on in your classes, right? And I say, honestly, we have a lot of discussion. I want the students to take the class if they're really curious about learning what this is. And we talk about life and lived experience. Like I will talk to them about what it was and is to be a woman in sports media, the good, the bad, the in between. And I think treating them, you know, not necessarily that I am at the top of the mountain speaking down to them with all my educational wisdom, but at least here, I felt very much a part of my classes. I was still intimidated by my professors and their brilliance, but I really carry that forward now. And I credit so much of it to Davidson. And I wonder, I mean, I don't want to know, but like, would I even be a professor or would I be any good at it had I not come here? So I think I'm so grateful for that experience. And like any of my former professors here, thank you. I probably didn't thank you enough then, but I thank you now.
Last word.
So mine's very closely related to a lot of what my colleague said. The academic rigor really prepared me for a job where critical thinking and really getting to the core problems is a big part of what I do. But I would say more related to the last answer, which is I'm fascinated by people and I find people incredibly fascinating. And I also am a little bit of the Anne Frank of I really see the positive side of people. And I love to get to know people on an individual level and find that really goodness in the person. Sometimes I'm totally disappointed. I told you, I've experienced a lot in my life, but most of the time I am just like I was here at Davidson. I am pleasantly surprised by how wonderful people are. When I came to Davidson, I wanted to expand my perspective, and I do that through people. And I was part of every group that I could be a part of, and making friends with people, the artsy ones and the jocks and the nerdy ones and everything in between. I find people incredibly fascinating. Davidson helped me explore so many different types of people that I'd never experienced in my very limited life coming here. So I think that for me, that's still a big part of who I am, and I find sometimes disappointed, but most of the time super thrilled and supported by people, just like I was at Davidson. I'll tell a quick anecdote to show that. I came here at 17. My 18th birthday was in November of my first freshman year. We're getting close to the end of the quarters then. And for my 18th birthday, 30 plus guys threw a surprise birthday party for me, cake and everything. It was really lovely. And it just shows that you can have assumptions about people, and that's really not a good idea. Have an assumption that people are wonderful, and most of the time they will fulfill that.
Oh, I love that. We are at our allotted time. Y'all have been fabulous. A+ on the questions. Thank you very much. Lunch is going to be right outside in the brown atrium, and then we'll be back in here at 2 o'clock for some very, very fabulous speakers. So thank you.